Are we okay? Okay. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the Climate Emergency and Overview Scrutiny Committee. My name is Andy Croy and I'm the chair. We have got full house almost of councillors here. We've got Councillor Johnson, Councillor Glover, Councillor Pittock, Councillor Cornish, Councillor Jorgensen, Councillor Margaret and Councillor Firmager. Okay, do we have any apologies?
Apologies from Councillor Graham Howe, and Councillor Anne Chadwick is scheduled to be a substitute, Chair.
Okay, I'm assuming she'll be here later on. Okay, good. Minutes of the previous meeting which have been circulated. Does anybody have any changes they want to make to the minutes? No, could I have a proposer for the minutes, please? Charles Margetts has proposed and seconded by Chris Johnson. Thank you. Declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? I would like to declare that I'm on the Barkham Solar Farm board, and that relates to the agenda item on Barkham Solar Farm. Yep.
Likewise.
And for Councillor Pittock as well. Okay, public question time. Do you have any questions from members of the public?
None received, Chair.
Okay, and then member question time. I can see we have one question. Is it just one question? Yeah. Okay, I can see we have one question from Councillor Cowan. Gary, I know you were here earlier. Are you here still?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you, and that's a shame.
The camera is open. I'm nice, I'm clean shaven anyway. So
yeah, which is it's a shame for radio, clearly. So, do you want to ask your question, or do you want to get your video sorted first?
Well, I'm not sure. It's showing the camera is on, so I don't. I've had this before, so I'm not sure what the problem is. No, I'll ask the question standing in my name.
Okay, thank you very much, Gary. So Gary's asked the question standing in his name, and I'm going to read the answer, if that's okay, Gary.
It's fine.
Okay. Okay, good. And welcome, Councillor Chadwick. So, Gary, hello. Thank you for your question. I appreciate, and I hope your residents do too, your stout defence of your community. The Climate Emergency Overview and Scrutiny Committee recognises the importance of the local plan update, and that is why we had a session earlier this year where we engaged extensively with the responsible officers and the executive member on the LPU's importance to our climate emergency response. I do not think blanket TPOs for any part of the borough came up. I would be reluctant to recommend a blanket TPO for Hall Farm, the borough as a whole, or for any other area for this committee to discuss. The borough, at your instigation, I think, adopted a tree strategy in June 2023, just 3 months ago. And the feasibility of implementing a borough-wide blanket TPO was discussed and considered by officers, councillors and consultants working on the development of the strategy. A recommendation such as the one you have requested would effectively overwrite the tree strategy. Even if every tree in Hall Farm had a TPO, it would not, as you assert, be a significant move designed to protect our environment against climate change, as there are simply not enough of them trees in that area. For comparison, the total impact of all the tree and hedge planting aimed for in the plan, 170 hectares, brings a carbon saving of just 1% of the total carbon savings in the plan. This committee prioritises its work by the relative importance of any item on the whole plan and our climate emergency response as a whole, and I cannot see the impact of any trees lost at Hall Farm being of significant climate emergency magnitude to justify the committee's time to examine this issue. There are bluntly more bigger issues to look at. I do appreciate the amenity, social and scenic value of trees, but the tree strategy and current TPO policy must be the way of protecting trees of value. It may be that you wish to ensure that particular trees are protected. So in my answer, I've included a link to the TPO process. In the plan, trees come under priority 4, carbon sequestration, should you want to follow up on this area. The 4th report of the plan should be available soon on the website. And again, my answer includes a link. And the tree strategy is here. And again, there's a link. Finally, this committee is not part of the administration. Officers and executive members are subject to robust scrutiny, and I invite you to review past videos of our work and to tune into future meetings to assure yourself of this. Do you have a supplementary, Gary?
Yeah, yes, thanks, Andy. I'm disappointed at that in the sense that in the past the council has put blanket TPOs on proposed development because the basic policy of trees is if trees are at risk, the council will put TPOs on them as a means of protection while they move forward, and to really imply that a TPO on 170 hectares of land would only impact on 1%. I would say 1% is better than no percent. I don't mean to be critical of the committee because I recognise it's not the administration, but I was hoping that you would look beyond, I'd say beyond narrow bounds, and what you would do is by agreeing to this principle, not specifically whole farm, but the principle of TPOs on larger development while the work is constructed, you're really actually saying houses before trees and trees don't matter. So it's more a comment than a question, and I'm happy to leave it at that. But thanks ever so much for your answer, Andy.
Okay, thank you, Gary, very much for coming this evening. Okay, so the next, no more member questions. So the next question on the agenda is, the next item on the agenda rather is item 24, which is the procurement report on CEAP actions. So I don't know if we have either a procurement person here who wants to give us a very brief introduction. We don't need the whole thing gone through because everyone I know will have read the report. Is that correct?
Hi, yes, Rob here from procurement.
Hi, Rob. Welcome to CEAP.
Thank you. Shall I go straight in with a quick summary?
Please, if you could.
Okay, so the report essentially sets out what we're doing in procurement to enable the climate emergency and wider agenda. I think in summary, I would say the procurement process has a range of different points at which we can bring in climate emergency, and that's throughout the whole procurement process and indeed through the life cycle of the contract. So I think I view procurement as enablers, if you like, and also ambassadors. So throughout the procurement process, you'll see that we make reference to the CEAP team, and we're fostering those engagements with the CEAP assessment tool as well throughout the procurement process. I mean, certainly there's a section in there around the tender evaluation as well, and that's the point at which we receive the tenders, we evaluate, and then we award based on the criteria that's set out at the start of each procurement process. So I suppose in summary, I think the report hopefully points out that procurement are enabling and also are acting as ambassadors of the CEAP agenda.
Thank you, Rob. Does anybody have any questions for Rob? I have got Anne, and I have got Norman, and have I got anybody else at the moment? And I've got David. Okay, thank you, Anne. Would you like to go?
Thank you. Yeah, good evening. So I see that under the tender evaluation, 70% weighting when judging a tender is on the price. So I just wondered, what percentage does the climate emergency component come out at in the evaluation?
Okay, yeah, sorry, shall I answer?
Please, if you what we normally do is the member will ask a question, you'll give an answer, and then we normally give the member there might be 2 or 3 questions from the same member on the same topic as they follow up.
Okay, yeah. So you're quite right. At the moment, the procurement strategy sets out that 70% of the points awarded on a above threshold tender will be for price, and 30% will be towards quality. There is a mechanism through which we can change that, and that is by exception, which would be agreed at Strategic Procurement Board. So that's the mechanism we currently have. I would say there is also an opportunity within the specification to design elements related to CEAP, so you can inform the key performance indicators and also the substance of either the services, goods or works that you're seeking to procure. But at the moment, it is set at 70-30. Yeah.
And so obviously the climate emergency component of the 30%, it's not going to be the 30%, is it? So do you know sort of what it would amount to?
That's at the discretion of the officers. So it's a 30% based on quality, and within that, but you can have a range of different approaches.
Just a couple of other things. I see that you're going to, because you're putting such a weight on price, you're saying that you're going to manage quality by increased management. But I'm sorry, this isn't to do with climate change, but I put it to you that that's actually going to increase your costs, and I wonder if that's actually going to make sense all round. But that's not really to do with climate change. Another thing I was wondering was why is climate change included in your social evaluation? Because it's not really social, it's environmental, and it's based on hard science, so it's not really social.
And I think that the climate emergency action plan has been drawn up by the CEAP team, so it's them who've set out those parameters. Right. So it's not really a question for the procurement.
Okay, okay, but I mean that's sort of helped to further bury the issue really, because it's buried now within the social component, which is some little part of the 30%. Okay, anyway, I do feel concerned as a result of all that. But anyway, that's it from me. Thank you.
Sorry, is there another question? Because I interrupted you.
I think I've actually got my question. I think I've asked my questions actually. Yes.
Okay, cool. If you get another chance later on. Norman.
Okay. Hi. Since you've had the sort of climate emergency as a consideration in any of these tendering exercises, have you completed any sizable tendering exercises where it's been included?
That is a very good question. I don't have an answer for you right now, but I can certainly go away and reflect on the tenders that we've undertaken to this point. I would say that there are a range of live tenders at the moment, including one for wheeled bins and so forth, of which it does comprise part of the tender evaluation criteria.
Okay. And what weight does it have in that evaluation?
I'd have to check the details. Apologies, I didn't have them in front of me.
Okay. I mean, part of what I was wanting to drive up, but it seems like there's maybe not completed exercises. You say in the paper that it could increase costs. You know, the tender prices could be higher by including it. It would just be useful to think about how that might play out. I mean, hopefully including these climate emergency aspects into the tendering exercises, there could be other benefits that sort of balance. So overall, perhaps, you know, we're not necessarily aiming to drive up the cost of these tendering exercises. There could be ways of you know, sort of reducing. Just wonder what sort of balances you've got in there.
So we do encourage whole life costing, which would take account for benefits that we might see through the life of the procurement, and then we would aim to evaluate on the basis of that approach as well. Yeah. Sorry, does that answer your question?
I think it does at this stage. I mean, it's a bit hypothetical when when we don't have an example to look at. So yes, I mean, I think that does answer it at the moment. Thanks very much.
Do you have any other questions, Norman? Okay, David.
Yeah, thank you. I'm kind of echoing some of Anne's comments here, because looking at this, yeah, sustainability, climate emergency is a small part, presumably, of a 30% weighting, where the overwhelming balance is about price. And in that mix, there's a kind of assumption that sustainability equals more expensive. Now, I mean, I've worked with a sort of global chemical company, and I've dealt with some of the largest retailers in the UK, if not in the world, most of whom lead in sustainability, and they simply don't buy this argument that making sustainable choices pushes up costs. It means you do things differently and that you apply different criteria. But in the end, it's part of a whole mix, which is a sort of the way we do business. And in reading through what I have this item tonight, I don't see climate emergency jumping out as being the way that Woking Borough Council does business. Is not top of our sort of list of who we are. And for sure, you live in a commercial world, price has to be key, but it's not a trade-off. And I'd really like to see something more fundamental in your sort of procurement policies that states very clearly what your thresholds are, what you will not accept, what audits you do of the suppliers, that really stand out to say, we really are trying to embed sustainability and environmental performance in the things we buy, rather than what I may be being unfair, but this feels suspiciously like a bit of a tick box thing. That it's a thing we do. We'll look at it. That's fine. Move on. That may be unfair, and I apologise if it is, but I really think as part of this committee, would like to see something far more graphic, if that's the right word, of what it is you're doing to move the dial on sustainable procurement.
I think there was a question at the end.
Let me summarise what that question is. Is there scope to reconsider what you've got in your procurement policies to really highlight what changes you're making to drive sustainable performance?
Sorry, I can see Imogen's hand up. I don't know whether, Imogen, would you like to come in on that before I comment?
Sure, Rob, you're doing very well. Don't worry about it. I think what we really need is legislation coming from central government. If we get that, then it's much easier to apply it to everything we do. I mean, at the moment, our policy as Woking Borough Council is to support the climate emergency as much as possible. But ideally, we need government legislation. And I think that's what you're asking, because that would make it very, very clear. Am I making sense, David?
Thank you, Imogen. David?
Yeah, I mean, legislation is a massive help in all environmental issues, for certain. It levels a playing field. It means that the best can compete on level terms with those who seek to sort of take shortcuts. So I agree with that. But procurement is about choices. And I've heard it argued that sustainability is about choices you make in procurement, whether as an individual or whether as a large corporation. And certainly Wokingham can make its own choices without primary legislation.
We can, and we are
Imogen, could I ask Rob to answer that, please? Thank you.
So, I mean, I think, I don't know whether this answers your question, but I see procurement as a toolkit through which we can enable the policies that are adopted by the authority. And I think we have the CEAP agenda. I think we have the CEAP assessment tool. I think we have the CEAP team, and we embed that throughout the procurement process. I think as the report sets out, I mean, for me, it does feel as though the climate emergency is, as with a range of policies, embedded throughout the procurement process, and we encourage that, as I said, all the way through. So I do feel that we are ambassadors. Apologies if that hasn't come across in the report as clearly as perhaps I feel it does in practice, certainly now and going forwards.
Thank you, Rob. David, I'll give you a chance to carry on if you want to.
Yeah, I take your point there, Rob, and the ambassadorship is fine, but that's different from being an agent for change. And we also have the ability here to be an agent for change, not just an ambassador for it. And I think I'd like to see more of that coming through in the policies that we use in our procurement processes.
Thank you. That was a statement rather than a question, which is fair. So do you have any other questions? I've got Norman, and I've got Ian, and I've got Chris. So Norman, would you like to go?
Okay. I think the other thing for me is just it's a plea, I guess, that if we're including things to do with climate emergency in the tendering exercises, it would also be good to set out at that stage how we're going to assess that as the contract unfolds. Because what I wouldn't like to see is just lots of nice words in a tender and then it's put on the shelf and forgotten about. So I think that's probably quite an important aspect as well. Don't know if that's currently included in your policies, but I think it's an important aspect.
I completely agree. I think throughout the procurement process, we'll have developed a specification, a range of key performance indicators as well. There'll be the tender process through which promises will be made, and then contract management is the process by which the authority and its contract management officers would seek to get those assurances indeed that that's being delivered on. So I think hopefully that comes through the document as well as part of the general practice that we operate.
Okay, thank you.
I've got Ian next.
Thanks, Rob. I've done some corporate stuff in the past. I know it's very difficult to get all bits of the organisation lined up, doing things the right way, the right processes, procedures. They find workarounds, you get blockages, you get all sorts of things. Some good stuff in this paper. Tell me what's actually wrong, what's not working, where are the blockages, what do we need to do to make this work?
Okay, big question. I think one of the aspects that I see with procurement is a greater embedding of procurement into the commissioning cycle, and throughout that, then we can seek to engage on the CEAP points, as I said, throughout the procurement process. So I think it's a greater engagement with procurement and therefore the CEAP team that I would like to see more. As I say, I think we're doing some great work already, so just more of the same. I think contract management as well is perhaps an area that we could strengthen, and I think there are plans and ambitions to do that as well.
Okay, thanks. Do you think you've got enough powers? Where things go wrong, people often bring procurements contracts late. Is the experience I've got late in the day, which almost forces your way of, they don't go through the system. They get their own way because the stuff is done late. Have you got powers to stop that kind of thing happening?
Thank you. I think that's a shared experience of procurement across multiple industries, and it's no different in local authorities. So we could always engage with services earlier in the procurement process. I would agree with that point. I think we have got the powers now. We have a strategic procurement board, which is chaired by our 151 officer, Graham Evers. So I think that is now in place. I think that's a really good tool through which we have the ability to reflect on procurement practices and also review and bring them into under question if needed to therefore promote the change. So I do feel that we are there with our powers across the authority.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Rob, if I look at the headline of the report, it says this report sets out the actions taken by the corporate procurement team to enable the CEAP action plan. This is what we're evaluating. So if I take a look at page 14, and we have the comments within there at the bottom. We have the introduction of the corporate strategy for procurement, commissioning and contract management issued in 2021. And the statement at the bottom says this requirement prompts officers to consider climate emergency as part of every procurement they initiate. So this report, this standard that's been set before you, the plan that's been set before you is that you should consider climate emergency as part of every procurement, and it is guidance for officers on what to consider. Would you feel better if it was a case that this was a requirement rather than a request, so that you had the ability to actually stand up in front of the different procurement processes to ensure that CEAP process is being followed?
I think it's a good question. I think for me, prompting throughout the process is a reminder of the CEAP, and I think therefore within services they'll have the ability to understand what's right for them. So all the different services will obviously have different requirements, through from construction all the way to social care. I think that prompting is an important aspect in the process, which is also then monitored and governed by the procurement governance that I've set out in the report. So we therefore go through strategic procurement board for any papers over 100,000, pounds, and then equally on through the relevant governance within the council, so executive and full council as required. So I feel as though those opportunities, if you like, within those governance settings enable that reflection on the CAP. So I would suggest that feels comfortable at the moment.
Thank you for that. I've got a second question, if I may. Thank you. So if I take that a little bit further, and we go on to page 15, just find the right place. Towards the top there, new governance process involving oversight of all procurements and strategic board meetings. So the statement in there is that you have responsibility to review and challenge procurement strategies which do not reflect on the climate emergency priority in an adequate or sufficient way, and that the CEP team attends some of these meetings. Do you feel you get more benefit of this if you were able to attend all the meetings?
So just to be clear, Chris, so that's the CEP team attends some procurement meetings. So Rob's not CEP, Rob is procurement.
Rob, as procurement, do you feel that it would be better if the CEP team turned up every time rather than when it seemed to be appropriate for them to turn up, that they were available to turn up and advise on all the meetings?
So we have the CEP team embedded throughout the procurement process, and they're, for example, engaged on a number of live op tenders and have been supporting us with market engagement on some significant tenders for the authority at the moment. I would also say that at procurement board, one of the standing members is Giorgio, who's Director of Place and Growth. So we have that engagement at that level as well within the board.
I'm not sure you quite answered that question, because I think the question was, should the CEP team be at every meeting? And you said that they were still at many meetings rather than at every meeting. Would it be better if they were every meeting?
Andrew might be able to answer for you that question.
Hi, yes, thanks very much for all your answers, Rob. All great. Yeah, so obviously from the climate emergency side, it's quite a small team, and there are hundreds of contracts, I'm sure, of varying sizes. And given that we're kind of early in the process of adding everything into all the documentation and stuff, we've identified, as Rob mentioned, some of the pilot projects, which are the larger ones to start on at the moment. Obviously, we are available to look at all of them, and as much as we can with all the other works going on. So we discuss those and try and identify the best ones at the moment, and we will look to try and do as much and more as we can.
Thank you, Andrew. Chris, do you have any more questions?
Give someone else a chance for a minute.
Okay.
I'll have a think.
Cool. Does anybody else have any more questions? Sure, because I've got some. Okay, so I just want to go back to this. I think this point that Chris raised, which is about the difference between prompting and considering and requiring, which is on page 14 of the pack I've got. And it just feels a little bit weak, to be honest. It's sort of optional. But do you not think that's the case? And should it not be stronger? I mean, if as you said, it was embedded, we would be requiring people to do things, wouldn't we, rather than just reminding them and hoping they did?
I don't know if Imogen wants to come in on that point as well. I suppose my view on it is we have the CEP assessment tool, we have the CEP team, and we enable the authority to deliver on the policies of which it needs to within that process, CEP included. So I would say as we go through the process, we do enable that. I suppose the question is, can we force that? And enable that through as a formal part of the tender. And I think obviously the 70-30 split is there. I think beyond that, there is, it's a difficult, it's almost a political question, I would suggest.
Okay, I can see a politician looming large on my screen. Imogen, would you like to address the political case?
Yeah, I sort of mentioned the legislation behind it at the moment, because at the moment with procurement, we have to. We have a duty to ensure that it's the best value for money. We have a duty to the Equalities Act, and there's legislation behind it that makes it those cases a stronger argument. Climate emergency is we very much want to support it. We want to do our best. It's best endeavours, but in the legal sense, we can't force the council to do it over and above everything else, I'm afraid to say. And I know that's probably what some people don't want to hear, but it's without that legal backing from, we are really basically saying our policy is to support the climate emergency and put it through as a consideration on our procurement process, but it can't really be stronger than other things we do, for instance, because of that reason. And I think that's where we're coming across in terms of why it seems weak, because we don't have the backing of the government, basically. It's really that simple. Hopefully I'm making sense.
Thank you. That's interesting. I think we have Councillor Kerr rather than Executive Member Kerr who would like to question you on this one.
No, not question, but the question put was the political viewpoint. And
Okay.
as another member of the exec member with climate, I just wanted to put my position across on this. We declared a climate emergency in 2019 to do everything that was possible. We know that the local government sector in this country is responsible. Their direct emissions amount to 2% of emissions in this country. Indirect is 10%. That's our supply chain. That is the ability to influence a huge amount of emissions through our supply chain. The law is not prohibiting us from going above and beyond what is expected of us, in my view. And we have the ability to lead by example by setting quite clear procurement aims and targets that send a message out to that supply chain. So the political answer, in my view, is that we should be looking at a way of bringing this into our procurement process and embedding it and making sure that it is actually something that we insist of our suppliers. So that's my political answer on it.
Okay.
I can add to that to say that from my point of view on the finance side, I don't disagree at all. We should do every point that we can. Try and enforce it, but in terms of a legal process, we still not quite as strong as we'd probably like it to be. Let's put it that way.
Okay, so going back to the legalities then, would it be breaking the law if we required officers to consider rather than prompted officers to consider?
No, we wouldn't be breaking the law, not at all.
Okay, so we could strengthen it then. Good. Do you know when we can do that by? I don't know if Rob wants to salvage something from this.
I can offer to take it away. Absolutely.
But thank you.
I think it's a question for legal on what we can legally enforce or not.
And procurement, I think, and the political leadership, I suspect. Okay. Okay, thank you. So just Rob, so going back to the 70-30 thing. So I think the way it concluded was you saying that the 30, the officers could decide it might be 0, it might be 30. That was the impression that I was left with.
So the quality evaluation, we need to bear in mind that the delivery of a goods, works or services won't necessarily all be around social value, but there is the flexibility to, as I said, to flex 0 to 30, dependent on the needs of the service. So I think, practically speaking, within that 30, I would probably advise that a portion of that needs to be on the actual delivery of the function, whatever it is you're buying, with a portion of that put towards the SEAP approach.
Okay, and how long has Wokingham Borough used the 70-30 split?
It was adopted as practice through the procurement strategy, which was agreed October 2021, I believe.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, before I carry on, does anybody else have any questions? I can see Chris and I can see Norman. I think Norman caught my eye first, very subtly. So Norman, do you want to go and then Chris?
Okay, it's really around the 70%. Again, I mean, by there is a danger that, you know, if a small proportion of the 30% was something on climate emergency, say 5%, that actually, because somebody came in with a very low price, you could actually take price as the absolute consideration above and beyond anything else, and that anything to do with climate emergency just had no consequence. Do you put any sort of weighting on these things to make sure that sort of thing doesn't happen, or could it purely come down to price?
I think to answer the point directly, I think sometimes it can come down to price. I think also there are opportunities throughout the procurement process to stop that from happening. So within the questions, you can build in certain pass-fail criteria. You can build things into the specification that are not negotiable. So there is the opportunity to reserve the ability and I suppose avoid that pitfall. And I think also, just to repeat the point around 70/30 can be changed by exception through the Strategic Procurement Board, which meets whenever it needs to consider those aspects of any procurement.
Could I just add to that question?
Norman, do you have a follow-up? Sarah.
I was just going to add to that. The Barkham Solar Farm procurement, it was decided to change the 70/30 weighting to 45, 45 and 10% social value. So that's an example in this current, with the current procurement strategy, of an example of a big procurement that we've done that with.
So 45 price, 45 CAP and 10% social.
Sorry, 45% cost, 45% quality and 10% social value.
Thank you. Anything? Okay, I've got Chris next, please, Chris.
Thank you. I'm just going to take the comments that have been going on at the moment. I'm not sure who's the right person that might be able to answer this as to or field an opinion, but the introduction of a procurement business partnering model gave the procurement team all sorts of avenues of being able to drag specialists into the conversations, etc. And one of the options down the bottom there says it also provides for the opportunity of procurement officers to ensure that climate emergency is considered as part of every procurement strategy before it's presented for view. Would you feel better if this was actually a mandated process rather than something that was maybe, if we feel like it, and pay a little bit lip service to it? And that's not against yourselves. It's a case of if it becomes a difficult thing to do, that it can be avoided. Would you feel it better if it was actually a mandated element of the process?
And sorry, is that in specific reference to business partnering?
In the business partnering side of things, yeah. So the comment that's been made in the report is that it also provides for an opportunity of procurement officers to ensure that climate emergency is considered as part of every procurement strategy before it's presented for review. So it provides the opportunity rather than ensures the opportunity is acted upon.
Chris, have you got a page reference just to help?
15. Page 15 it starts, but it's over on page 16, I think the button it is. Yeah, towards the bottom of the third bullet point. Sorry, that's the wrong. Get the right page.
I mean, if I can, I think is the.
Sorry, it is page 15. It's the last paragraph of that section in the middle of the paper.
Yeah, and so I think that the mechanism we've got here is saying that CAP should be assessed at several points within the procurement process, and that's enabled through procurement business partnering, because we're taking the policies, we're taking the process into all the requirements and giving ourselves sufficient time to consider those aspects as we go through. You know, not to repeat the paper, but we've got the broader strategy, we've got the procurement options papers, we've got the governance process, and I think there was a discussion before on the point about can we mandate this, that I think we said we take away, and I think for me business partnering is the tool through which we deliver what's been agreed corporately, and those processes reflect that, I hope.
Thank you for that.
David, and anybody else after David? And Catherine. So David, then Catherine.
Rob, I just wondered whether there's any opportunities you've examined for actual training in sustainable procurement, and it comes under a variety of names and guises. But I think a lot of what we've heard this evening relies upon some member of the CAP team sitting on a contract negotiation. But for this to be really sort of effective, it seems to me the procurement team need to own it themselves and to be conversant with requirements of sustainable procurement. So have you had any training in that area? And if not, would you consider it?
So I think what we've got here is a procurement process, and we're bringing the CAP team in at the relevant points, and the CAP team are the experts. They have the assessment tool as well through which they deliver. Part of the professional training for procurement is the SIPS courses, and within that there is sustainable procurement, which I've received. I think there's always professional development on sustainable procurement and other elements within the procurement function. I would say, going back to the point where we are ambassadors, and I think hopefully Andrew would attest to that as well, that we are promoting that throughout the process. So I just to answer your point directly about training, I think that's always an opportunity and always something we look to do in the procurement team as part of our professional development.
Thank you. And I can see Andrew has his hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Just to reiterate what Rob said, that we have been to some of the procurement team meetings and helped with informing some of the procurement officers on the kind of the CAP and the background and the sustainability side of things. Or I don't know if you were trying to refer to it if there's like some professional sustainability training. It's not like that, but going to make sure everyone's on the same page and what we're looking for, and kind of to help them, as Rob mentions, in that business partnering role when they're meeting with officers, to remind them of the ideas and things, so at least they have a background to support them.
And can I just add to that? That's not to remind the procurement officers, that's to remind the services that are commissioning the work through which the procurement officers will then go and procure. So for me, it's about enabling the climate emergency within the commissioning context to then make sure that procurement are picking up the requirements through the process that's been set out in the paper.
Any questions from anybody else? Sorry, my apologies, Catherine. Catherine, now please.
It has gone very quiet.
Yeah, sorry.
My apologies, I didn't realise Catherine had her microphone off. That's my fault.
Right,
Catherine,
okay.
Yes, but we don't need the typos. Stuff.
Right, okay, we can we know about that. Okay, so where you say at the bottom, page 17, that suppliers are getting more enthusiastic about supporting climate emergency, do you have ways of measuring that they're actually not just greenwashing, that they really do have more sustainable products and services?
Well, it's generally through contract management that we would seek those assurances. We would qualify any tenders that come through evaluation, and then the contract management largely sits within service areas to undertake. So I think it's at that point they would then, as officers, seek to assure themselves and the authority that promises are being delivered on, and those elements of the tender are being qualified throughout the life of the contract.
Thank you, and I can see that Andrew has his hand up.
Yeah, just to add on a little bit that of course, if we're talking about offsetting and stuff in reference to greenwashing, that we would obviously follow the hierarchy and want to avoid that, and use it as the last resort when in these conversations and stuff with suppliers and the criteria and stuff.
Thank you, Catherine. Would you like to carry on with that? Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else? No. Okay, so I'll go then. When we're looking at potential suppliers, how do we, we have a questionnaire, we ask them questions about what they're doing, but do we actually do any sort of, I don't want to call it due diligence because it's the wrong word, but do we actually do any sort of proper assessment of what they're doing and what they say they're doing? Do we actually check their claims?
Well, so as part of the procurement process, there'll be a selection questionnaire. Within that, we can ask for relevant documents to include policies. They would be submitted, generally speaking. We would also follow up on any references that might be put forward for a tender, and we would seek to qualify those. And then I think throughout the life of the contracts, it's down to then the contract managers across the authority to really engage with the suppliers to make sure they're delivering on the various elements of their contract, which can include and will include delivery against any specification, any key performance indicators within that, and also the tender promises that are made through that kind of ITT stage.
Sorry, I'm not thinking about the actual execution of the contract or the fulfillment of the contract so much. I'm thinking much more about if a business says we are doing X, do we check on what they are doing as a business, and do we check that somebody else is checking on what they're doing as a business?
I think it's, as I've said, really. Sorry, can you give me an example of, just so I can understand it perhaps a bit deeper?
That, for example, if they say that our fleet is entirely electric, is that claim audited or is that claim supported? Or if they say our process is carbon neutral, do we have any way of checking that what they're saying is correct? I mean, can they point to like either an auditor's report or an environmental audit report? I don't know what the details will be, but do we go to that level of assurance that what they're saying is so?
So if it's within the tender process and that's part of a claim that they're making, we would seek to understand that in full. Because if they're suggesting, and that's part of their response to a tender question, as an example, we would seek to be assured as a tender evaluation panel that was correct and truthful. So we may seek clarification questions within the process. We may also ask for evidence and documents to be submitted as part of that tender process as well. Does that answer your question?
It sort of, I'm going to go to Sarah in a minute, but you say may, but it doesn't sound like there is a structured way of doing it, like you're always following up on these things.
Sorry, I said may because it depends on the question that is being posed within the tender process. So, for example, we may ask for some very specific information with a policy to be attached that would then potentially be clarified and questioned if we were missing some elements of that assurance.
Thank you, and I've got Sarah who'd like to come in.
And Rob will need to correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I do believe that there are ISO accreditation, so an audit of environmental standards which businesses are aspiring to. I think it's ISO 1401 or something is the environmental one. So Rob will need to clarify that, but I believe that is an audited approach to assessing environmental standards of businesses.
Thank you, Sarah. So for example, do we ask businesses to be 1401 or whatever this number is? 14,000. Do we ask business? Do we say this is like an entry level test for you guys before you can ask for our business?
Sorry, so for me the internet broke a couple of moments there and I couldn't hear the full question. However, I think I got the gist of it, just around ISOs. So my response to that would be,
it was about the particular ISO. We think it's 14,001 on environmental standards. Do we ask our suppliers to be compliant with that or to be working towards that?
Not every single supplier to the council, no. We can require that. We can request that in the specifications, but it's very dependent.
Go on then. What's it dependent on?
So for me, it's dependent back to the climate assessment. It's about what are we specifying, what are we buying, what are we asking for from services, and that comes back to the assessment tool that we would seek to engage services on throughout the process of commissioning and then organising that procurement.
Again, I'll be honest with you, I don't know enough about 14,001. I've just heard of it this evening. What sort of procurement wouldn't it be suitable for? And what procurement would it be suitable for? This is what I'm struggling to understand, why we would not ask for it if businesses are applying for it because it's a good thing environmentally. Why would we not ask it of everybody unless they're like a window cleaner or somebody?
Well, yes, indeed. So to have an ISO, I believe, is quite the undertaking for businesses. So you're potentially therefore putting at risk any small medium enterprises that may wish to bid for opportunities. There's lots of considerations to be made around that, and I think it comes back to the point of using the assessment tool and working with the CEAP team to understand what's appropriate for each commission, and therefore we can bring that through into the procurement documents. I think it needs to be flexible, and it's on a I would say on a case by case basis. Okay,
thank you. Thinking about us then as an organisation, lots of organisations, certainly commercially, will have like an anti-bribery statement policy, an anti-slavery policy, that sort of thing. Do we have an equivalent for the climate emergency?
I don't know, Andrew, if you wanted to come in on that point.
Sorry, is there a legal kind of requirement for businesses to do this?
No, not a legal requirement. Do we have like a sort of an overarching policy which has that sort of position in our organisation? We expect everyone in the organisation to be aware of it, and we expect everyone in the organisation to abide by it, and we expect the people in our supply chains to also abide by it if they can, because obviously it doesn't have the legal force. But do we have any policy like that we can point suppliers at?
So not currently in terms of official policy. I think obviously in terms of if you're talking about suppliers, the wording is in the current wording as it is in the procurement strategy documents, and obviously we are discussing those, and that's what the CEAP actions are about, in trying to make sure those are thorough, but not official policy wise. I say the main document is the CEAP itself, and in this instance the procurement strategy.
Is this something that commercial businesses do? They have a policy on the climate emergency, and it's like their overarching position of where they are and what they expect of the people they have relationships with?
Some people, obviously it depends on the size of the organisation. If you're looking at people like Tesco's and things, then obviously the larger it gets, the more common it is, depending on they have to have sufficient to have their sustainability or however they call it team. Sorry, yes. So some larger organisations do, and it varies in the wording, but not us as a council, and I don't know how many if other councils do in that level of specification.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anybody else have any questions? No. Okay, we've got Chris.
Thank you. Just got a comment towards the end of this process, etc. That if we want the procurement process to include CEAP, and we are looking for our providers and our contractors to meet standards that we want to set them, some of those activities might cost them quite a lot of investment, and they may want to hold back on some of that and not actually meet the standards. So do we have any, I'm going to go the carrot and the stick of effort. It's easy for us to put the stick out and say, if you don't meet it, you're out. But do we have any carrots to encourage them to meet these standards, to bring them on board as our partners in this, in procurement?
Well, there are ways of structuring that in a tender. So we could we could build elements into the tender that are either brought on later in the life cycle of the contract. I've certainly seen in other areas incentive payments for different elements. I think if we've specified something and it's in the body of the contract and there's an expectation that the provider will deliver on that, and it's picked up through contract management that that's not the case, then you could apply the stick method. But I suppose to some degree that is carrot anyway, because we might help them to understand where they could get back into the position where we're comfortable of delivery. Into the contract default process in that respect.
Thank you. So where I'm steering this again will be the case of that if we are encouraging these contracts, that these partnerships to grow and be longer term than just 1 or 2 years, that by encouraging them, saying, well, you're the right person for the right company for the moment. You've got almost everything there. We'll take you on board. But if you improve, if you can meet these other standards, and there are longer term contracts available, is there a process that this sort of incentivizing these providers that can be taken on board with the procurement process?
I think we have to just be careful around the procurement regulations and promising things to organisations when we've got a regulated process that we'd need to undertake, and we need to be in line with the regulations on that, fair, transparent, and offering equal opportunity in the procurement activity. I would say, going back to an earlier stage in the procurement process, we'd have a market engagement event, and I referenced the waste and the highways market engagement that's currently underway. Those discussions happen at that stage where we understand the length of contract that may be attractive in order to deliver on some of the ambitions that we have as an organisation. So I would suggest that we understand that in advance of letting a contract. And then I think within the life cycle of a contract as well, we always encourage a partnership approach, because, certainly with our tier 1 strategic contracts, that is, they're a significant proportion of spend for the authority. And within that, we look to make sure and harness with innovation, constant continuous improvement towards our ambitions as well.
Thank you for that. Cheers.
Thank you, Chris and Robin. Now, Sarah.
Yeah, I just wanted, on Chris's question, I went to a presentation at last year's LGA conference, and there was a presentation given. I cannot remember for the life of me the local authority it was, but they were using procurement in the climate world to provide certainty to green industry. I think the point made is local government is a big purchaser, large contracts, and through having large contracts across the sector, you can provide certainty to industries that allow them to invest in making those sustainable changes. So there's a bigger picture element to this here as an industry. It's the point I wanted to make.
Thank you. Is there anybody else? I think we're nearly there. I've got a few more though. So just a very quick question on page 15. It talks about the new governance process. When did that? It's new from when? When was it introduced?
Apologies. Yes. So new governance process within the organisation. I think that's referencing. Let me just double check the strategic procurement board.
Strategic procurement board.
That's right. Yeah. So that came into effect. Well, the procurement board was in operation in 2021, and then we have reflected on the governance levels, i.e. the threshold at which papers will go through strategic procurement board, and that was February of this year. We changed the thresholds down to £100,000, because before that it was a much higher threshold. So in effect, what we're seeing is more papers through that governance board than we have done before.
But the strategic governance board wasn't introduced as a response to the climate emergency, was it? That was, I'm guessing, introduced as a response to something else.
The strategic procurement board, I believe, was brought around for reasons of good best practice, and I think was highlighted in one of the SIPFA audits, and I believe that was in 2020. Apologies, I wasn't in the organisation at that point.
I was just trying to sort of work out why we had one and where it had come from. Okay, thank you very much. So then, looking at what I want to do now is to actually look at the climate emergency action plan, the section which deals with procurement, if that's okay. And I don't, just out of interest, how do you guys in procurement, do you look at this part of the plan, or have you had your bullet points, you've taken your bullet points away and you don't really look at the plan? How does it work for you guys?
I'm so sorry, I missed half of that question.
I'm sorry. So we tend to focus on the plan, the climate emergency action plan. So I'm looking at the section headed procurement, and I'm just wondering how familiar you are with that. Are you familiar with it as it is in the plan, or have you just taken away the main bullet points and the main action points for your team? Just so that in my head I can set the background.
Okay, yeah. So in the procurement team, we have a lead officer, and that lead officer works with the CAP team very specifically around the procurement aspects of that. There is an awareness of the broader climate emergency, but I think we're quite focused and have been quite focused over recent months on how we can move those procurement elements from red to certainly amber and green. That's been our focus.
Yeah. There's just from looking at it, there's, and I don't think we've looked at it in detail in the past, but there is a lot of red, and there's not been any new additions to the plan over the last year. I don't. Sarah might be able to help with this. I don't know if there were changes from the year before. There just seems to be a lot of red. That's all.
I can't remember off the top of my head the comparison from year to year.
Okay.
Andrew, sorry, Rhiannon, I don't know if you wanted to come in on that point, but certainly we're in discussion about the particular RAG status of a number of those actions. I think if you look at point 1, it's about having a procurement strategy in place, and that has been in place since 2021.
I think it's fair to say that the procurement team are aware of the RAG status in the CAP, and I think they've been actually quite concerned about it, but because of the timing that we've had in terms of developing the CAP itself, I think they've made a number of steps to improve that status, and we're very confident that when we work with them next year, that we will be able to, that they're moving in the right direction, and that we will be able to improve those.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Does anybody else have any questions? I don't have any questions. So if we're all happy with that, we can stop that and let you go, Rob. And thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Do we have any recommendations we want to come out of that? David?
Yeah, I must say that if I felt this was truly embedded within our procurement process, we'd be presented with a lot of glittering examples of successful procurement featuring climate change initiatives.
Yep.
And I haven't seen any. I would like to see maybe they come back in 6 months or a year's time and actually demonstrate some examples of how this comes into practice. And probably 6 months rather than a year, because a year's a long time in politics.
Well, I'm sort of thinking that the next CAP will be out next September, won't it? So we probably want them before then. So do we want 6 months? So
those who may still be here.
Yeah. Well, we'll all still be here in 6 months. Yeah. I think. Who knows? Yeah. Chris.
Yeah, looking at the procurement paperwork and look at the yellows and reds, is there anything in there that we can turn around and say this is something that is within reach? A lot of it is for 25, 27, which isn't within reach, but delaying it and delaying action on it is just going to keep it red. We're never going to get there. So is there any input we can have that some of these processes have been started?
So that would be what you want the RAG changed, or you want work done to ensure the RAG changes?
I don't see anything in here that gives us an indication that I mean, the status is not started for most of the reds. Is when are they due to start?
Yeah.
When are we going to see some sort of input to start the progress towards the 25, 27 target, or is it just going to see something that slips and slips? I'd like to see some sort of indicator in there as to of a projection to start some of these things at least. And the amber one, the only amber one for this period, 23, 24. Just wondering how that can be improved to a green.
Do we then want an update report, which an update from procurement with hopefully some glittering examples, or then move towards examples? And if they haven't got examples, we want some indication from the CAP team, because the CAP would prepare the RAG about some more detail on where they are if they haven't changed colours.
I'm I'm just looking at the current status for the 8.1.1, where it says we've got the two items there. Initial strategy approved in July 2021. Procurement board now in place.
So which one is this one? Sorry,
This is on the procurement 8.1.1.
Yep.
The current status has got two comments. An initial strategy approved in July 2021, and we've got procurement board now in place. But we have quite a few other items, if you say, on the milestones and outcomes, and which of those milestones have been reached and which ones are still outstanding?
So this is for the update.
Yeah, for the update.
Okay. Yeah. So we want an update. We want it in 6 months' time.
For the 23-24, early next year at the latest. So we're talking 4 months' time. So otherwise, we're getting to the point where we're getting towards mid-24, and it may be too late to start things or put things or edge things on a little bit.
Okay, so we would like an update on, because it's urgent, we'd like an update on 8.1.1.
Yeah.
By the end of February.
By the end of February, yeah.
And we'd like an update.
Some milestone. Sorry, not some indicators on the other elements in there, 8.1.2 and 1.3. In fact, all the others that are red, because they're all not started apart from one.
So you've got an update on the rest, but with more detail on
because we've got items there that are not started. We're looking at what the projected start dates are for the processes, or if there are any hurdles that are preventing them from starting the process.
Okay, so can we cover that off with just more detail on where they are?
Cover that with more detail as to the current status.
We don't necessarily want that for by the end of March, by the end of February, do we?
That's 6 months away at least. We need that. Just an indicator, and not asking for a detailed report, an indicator as to if there are any hurdles stopping them, or if they've made some progress, or when they've got start dates for some of these activities.
Okay.
Add to that, because I mean, they're all indicating red, but none of them are due to be enacted for quite some time. So, taking Chris's point, if this start date for it's in a year's hence, let's say, then why are they indicated red? Are they really red? Red suggests there's something out of kilter. So are they all supposed to have been well started, 50% through or whatever? I mean, it's really saying the same thing as Chris, but I think it'd be useful to have that indication.
So in effect, so we want some commentary on them to understand if it's a red or proper red. In effect, commentary on. So that comes under, I think, under the second recommendation about the nature of the detail we're going to get. And the other side don't.
Norman tweaked something about 10, 15 minutes ago. Are we ISO 14001 compliant?
I don't think it applies to local government. I don't. This is why I referred it to Rob. So I don't actually. Sorry.
ISO 14000.
I know it's something that businesses get an accredit, because Andy specifically asked the question about are there any audit processes for this, and I'm aware of this in business, but I don't know the details because I'm not a procurement expert.
I was reminded by Norman. ISO 14001 is suitable for organisations of all types and sizes, be they private, not-for-profit, or governmental.
Well, there we go. Thank you.
So maybe we should consider that a target for ourselves.
That was a recommendation. to investigate
What I would say is, and I mean, obviously it's up to you what you recommend. What I would say is there are things that happen in local government that put local government together that supports. So it could be, I'm not saying one more than another, but it may, while it can be applicable, doesn't necessarily mean it's the best measure, but something to consider.
But it is a measure that business will understand, which is important. So can we have that as a recommendation as well? Are people happy with that? That we investigate the appropriateness of 14,001. Okay, that's 3. And then Imogen almost made a promise there, didn't she, about tightening up the contracts. Almost. But Rob said he would take it away, and so we would like a follow-up on that. Any other recommendations? Yes, then.
Was it you that suggested the climate emergency policy statement that the council might perhaps should have one?
Yes. So that can we have that one as well? So another recommendation is we have sort of overarching statement. Sarah, do you want to?
I was going to say a corporate policy on this would be quite a good idea. We're looking at a corporate policy for property in terms of assets, because obviously property sits across the whole organisation with a centralised function. So developing a corporate policy in the same way for procurement is certainly something that I think should be considered.
Okay, so we can. So corporate policy, that's another recommendation that the CEAP, who would develop that? The procurement development corporate policy. So that would hold on. That's the policy on procurement. What about for the council as an organisation? Second.
I would suggest that's a separate request. You can have a corporate procurement policy on how we, buy with climate. There's a separate request there you're discussing.
Do we want to? Why not? Why not? Christmas in there.
And the other thing was whether to try and ask procurement to require consideration of the climate emergency rather than prompting for it, or whatever it is she's been talking about.
So if I can put that in.
Was this the Imogen point?
No, this is my point.
This is your point. Okay.
So Imogen's not there all the time.
Okay, just in my head. Okay, sorry.
You must have terrible dreams. You've got some terrible dreams, Andy. I didn't say that.
Okay.
So yeah, this is about the lot of the wording in the document is about prompting or encouraging, and I feel that there are some elements of the process that should actually be mandatory. That there should be a presence of the CEAP team at certain meetings. There should be the mandatory training for this. I'm just going to go back and just
interrupt there. So I think Andrew, who is in the CEAP team, said that they basically sort of said they couldn't make every meeting because they don't have the bodies. So.
And this will be because they dropped the bar to 100,000 K to make more of it accountable.
So they do pick the ones they want to go to. So I'm not as fussed about the attendance. I do think the tightening up of the language, the strengthening of the language is important.
Yeah. Okay.
We have that one as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have any more recommendations? Can we make it double figures? I don't think we want to, do we? So we've got a number of recommendations. Do we want Neil to go through them, or are we happy with the gist of our conversations being captured by Neil and for Neil to trust Neil? Yeah, he's always very diligent. Okay then. So in that case, anyone would like to propose all the recommendations? Okay, Chris seconded. Norman, all those in favour? All those against? Carried. Right, good. Sorry, the next item on the agenda is the Barkham Solar Farm update. So Sarah, is this you, or do we have an officer? Or
I think you've got myself and David for this.
Perfect.
It's a very short update, but it's an update of good news. And just to reiterate what I said in full council last week, officers have done an absolutely sterling job. I don't know if you tuned in and watched the full council meeting, David, but thank you very much for you and the team and everyone that was involved. I mean, obviously it's in the report, but I don't know if you want to add anything, but you've done a great job, and yeah, it's brilliant.
Thank you, Sarah. Are there any questions for either Sarah or David? Welcome, David. Any questions? So I've got Charles and I've got Michael. Charles and Michael. Okay, Charles, do you want to go?
Thank you. Now, obviously, we don't know. It's obviously good news and welcome that this has been brought forward. My question was just, it's now possible that construction of this solar farm will be going on at a similar time as the two schools on the site next door. Now, the concern I have as a local member is Barkham Ride and the access to it, especially the right-hand bend at the end, where currently where you drive down it and a bus comes the other way, you have to stop to let the bus through. So it was just really about construction traffic. And at the relevant time, can there be a construction plan written out for both of these sites, especially if they clash, which is shared with local members, maybe Finch Hampstead members and Barkham and Arborfield members?
Shall I take this one? Absolutely, we will have construction management plans for both of those projects coming forward. And you'll probably remember for the solar farm project, we also have a requirement to set up a local community group. So as part of that local community group, we can help relay messages about what the construction logistics are going to be for those projects, but also manage those impacts and manage those expectations and form almost a conduit into the developers for you.
Thank you, that's helpful. I mean, just a brief point on this. When the solar farm originally came forward many moons ago, I had a conversation with Gregor Murray at the time, and it was before you were involved, and he actually mentioned to me there was a plan at the time to use small non-articulated lorries to pre-construct all this stuff off-site and bring it in small modules, and I was wondering if that's still the case.
David, do you want to?
We need to work that through with Bouygues moving forward for the solar farm in particular. I know the schools themselves will likely be modern methods of construction, so there could be potentially a large element constructed off-site and then shipped in. So yeah, it's all things we need to consider moving forward as part of our management of the impacts of these developments on the local area.
Yeah, just to add, I mean, Bouygues at the moment are doing the pre-construction work, the surveying, the detailed design. That detailed design and the costings and everything, once we've got all that detail, is going to come back for another gate review. So these are all things that can be looked at through the exec process as to how it's actually planning to be executed and before we proceed.
So I'm just to carry on from what Charles, I think what one of the things I'm not sure I quite thought, David, was when Charles was asking about the effect of the two developments happening simultaneously, will there be one transport plan and it will be seen as one bit of the borough which is going to be affected, or will there be two separate plans and we're hoping they're going to not clash with each other too much?
There will be separate plans for each of the developments because those are the requirements under the planning permission, but we are of course one council and we are the same project team or same development team working on these projects, so we will ensure that these coordinate moving forward and use a community liaison group, as I said earlier, to make sure that the messages are properly relayed and that coordination is properly undertaken.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, actually, it's a bit worse than Charles pointed out, because we've also got two live planning applications for 31 and 33 Barkham Ride, which total up about 70 to 80 houses. And we've also got the refurbishment of California Crossroads. I'm hoping that will be complete and out of the way before any of this starts. But we do need, I'll be greatly reassured to think that somebody in the council had an overview of this, because we have absolute sort of traffic carnage down there if this all happens at the same time.
So I don't think that was a question. I think that was a point taken on board, and I guess they'll put the town centre into Arborfield.
So I'm going to say, as a question, can we please make sure somebody within the highways team, the planning team, or wherever, has got an overview of all that potential construction within about a quarter of miles of each other?
Thank you. David's nodding, so I'm guessing that's a yes. And then Sarah. No? Okay, okay. Michael.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I've been silent most of the meeting, actually. It's most unlikely. There is just mention on page 4 of the supplementary papers about originally the solar farm was meant to be connected to the grid by 2026. Then reading down further, it says that this will now be 2037. And then a bit further down on the next paragraph, it says it's going to be more closely aligned with the original 2026 optional offer. Sorry, I just really wonder when it is likely to be connected to the grid, because I'm a bit confused by that.
Okay, so they've verbally told us it's more in line with the original 2026. It's around the end of 2026, which is the original, possibly early 2027. We're just waiting for the final contract variation to come through with those finer details. So anything you want to add to that, David?
No, that's a fair summary.
Okay, that's better news than having that than later on. I'm also just really going on what Charles and David mentioned. I just really, as a general point, when is the actual work due to start? Obviously, that's going to impact on all the other developments going on there as well.
That will really depend on when our connection date is, and we will work back from that connection date. So once we've received a formal letter from SSEN, we'll be able to properly programme out the works and the start on site for this project, and we'll be able to see how that ties in with the other projects around the vicinity.
Yeah, could I just come back on another one on that one? Whatever date it starts from, how long will the actual construction work take?
It's estimated to be 9 to 10 months of construction work.
Thank you.
Okay, I've got David down, but I'm not sure if you've already done yours. So I've then got Norman, and then after Norman, Anne.
Okay, thanks. Michael asked part of my question, so I'll leave that. How soon do we think we will sort of conclude things with SSEN? And then are you planning to bring a paper back to scrutiny before it goes to executive?
I think we're expecting the contract variance within the next couple of weeks, aren't we, David? Is that correct?
Yes, imminently.
Yeah, so wait, it's any day now, and I think an update on the solar farm is a standing item on this committee anyway.
It is a standing item, but I think what Norman is asking is,
it's really the procurement business case which is being built up, which will go to executive for approval. Can we see that before it goes to executive?
So before it goes to gate review at the executive to actually say this is the design and we're going to move to build, if the committee would like to request that at the appropriate time, then that's the committee's prerogative.
when is the next meeting now?
So it won't necessarily be ready for then. It will be a few months. It might be worth having a conversation with David and the team to find out when that's likely to be and programme it in at the appropriate time, but it certainly won't be for the next meeting.
Okay, so 2nd of November. Okay, so as Sarah said, we have a standing item on the solar farm. So I would imagine that anything which happens will come before us, and we'll get the latest update. If there's a bigger document that comes through that we can't deal with in the meeting, then I'll have to make space for it in addition to the standing item. But I'm very keen that we test it properly. I apologize. I've got Anne and then Chris, and then David.
Yeah, so it sounds as if National Grid is still building up its infrastructure, and that's why it had first said not till 2037, because that was sort of a cautious approach from them. But obviously they've changed their policy. But it sounds if in some situations of extreme weather or something, they might refuse to take electricity being generated by the solar farm at Barkham. Do we know whether that would cause any sort of problem?
So National Grid, they made an announcement earlier in the month that they have released projects worth 10 gigawatt of additional network capacity, and we've been confirmed to be one of those projects that have been included in that. So effectively, there's no more blockage at the transmission level, and now we're effectively dealing with SSEN at this moment in time at the site level to connect in. So we don't anticipate there will be any issues with at the transmission level to connecting into the grid.
I could just build on that if that helps. Or do you want to ask another question?
Well, just to say that what I read, what I Googled, it did say that there could be situations where they would refuse to accept electricity.
So contract that you have is for a certain amount of electricity, and that's what you're allowed to put into the system. I mean, I know that they have situations up in Scotland sometimes where they ask the wind turbines to be shut off because they can't get it through the transmission into the UK, but they're actually paid for that downtime. It is the situation there. So you're actually they're losing out on that generation because of the transmission. The reason why they had transmission issues initially is because they had more projects for the capacity in the transmission part of the network. What's happened is there's been work on the queuing systems. There's a lot of projects ahead in the queuing system that had no chance of ever actually coming to fruition, and they've been removed from that process, removing that overall amount. And this has been through the reforms that have been going on through Ofgem, and that's what's happened. So they've removed those redundant projects that were blocking up the queue.
Oh, thank you. That's interesting.
Do you have any follow up on that?
No.
No. Okay. Okay. Good. So after Anne, I have Chris.
So I would turn around and say probably the oil companies put all these extra things in to slow the queue down, so you get the electricity from you. But there you go. So I shouldn't say that, should I? No, I don't know if it's nasty, suspicious mind. Anyway, bottom of page 4. So when we're looking at the timescales, you've got 6 to 9 months worth of design work. So realistically, we're not going to see any major change in activity until we get to say probably 12 months. So it's going to be over 6 months at least before we see anything more beneficial to us to understand. And then when we go through that process, and you're going through the procurement, etc., that then doesn't become a climate emergency element, and that's now about process and procurement. Is this the right committee to bring it back for that sort of conversation, or should it go somewhere else? Community and
very good question. Can we have a think about it? No, the executive doesn't tell us what to do. Right. Okay. Let's have a think about it. I think we'll look at it in overview and scrutiny management, and I guess we'll look at the different work.
I'd turn around and say there's still an element of the CEP, that there's still an element of climate emergency we want to talk about, which shouldn't all come into here. There's going to be duplicate of effort going on, and we don't.
Well, actually, there won't, because nobody else will be allowed to look at it. Nobody else should be looking at it if we're looking at it. I have got David.
Yeah, the costings that we've got are just about a year out of date. When do we think they're going to be updated, and are we hopeful there won't be any unpleasant shocks in that?
So once all the surveying and design work's done, then Bouygues will work with suppliers, and we will get a more accurate, detailed idea of costings. What we are seeing is that a lot of the components that make this up are actually coming down in cost at the moment. So, but I'm sure, David, you might want to fill out that answer a little bit more.
No, nothing we're seeing is significantly concerning us at this point, other than interest rates, perhaps. But at the same time, as Sarah says, there is some evidence that the components are coming down, and similarly, so yeah, it's a fair summary. Yeah.
Okay, any follow up, David? Or anybody else want to ask any questions?
I think we all wait with bated breath.
Okay then, so does anybody, I think everyone, I haven't got anything extra to ask on that. Has anybody else got any questions? No? Okay, thank you very much, David. And Rhiannon, thank you. And Andrew, I think, is still there. And Sarah, thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you.
Well done on the solar farm. Definitely.
Cheers.
Okay, so any recommendations on that? I guess the only one I can think of is Chris's, that overview and scrutiny management look at the future handling of the farm and if it's all in the right place.
Chair, basically. Oh, sorry. Also about a construction plan that actually manages how these sites are built. You know, connected, because that's going to be, this could be, if it's managed properly, it could go very smoothly. But if it's not, it'll be a train wreck.
Yep. So I think perhaps, yeah, how would we do that in terms of who? So we want to ensure that the development team have although they have to produce individual plans for each development, we need the reassurance and the integration.
I would suggest reassurance on the integration and perhaps involving local members or giving them oversight because they understand the details on the ground, which with the best will in the world, the development team may not.
Chris?
Yeah, if I understand from the comments on there, this is going to be a community group as well. Yeah.
There has been one for a while, I think. Well, they've been involving the community.
So I think again, whatever comes out of this about the plan, the transport plan for these particular projects, considering there are the other two that I mentioned there, it seems an awful lot going on that doesn't all sort of gel together. It is one team that's responsible for it, but to make sure that message is properly delivered to the community as well, not just to ourselves.
Yep, agreed. David?
Yeah, I just from the comments that are being made, I can see silos already being built. I really echo exactly what Charles said. We need to have a whole working party or whatever it might be, looking at everything that's happening in that area. Because otherwise, we're going to have massive chaos on our hands.
To be honest, I didn't get the impression that silos were being built. I just got that wasn't my sense. I got the feeling they were appreciative of the area, well, they are now.
Yeah, maybe I'm just one of the last natural pessimists.
And it's been that road's not great at the moment. Yeah, I just think Arctic's delivering all these solar panels, potentially big Arctic's delivering construction material for these schools, it all going on at the same time. We need to be on top of it, otherwise it's a problem.
It's a perfect thing to bring to scrutiny. It is. I mean, because we've got the planning applications and what's going on the planning application, the two schools, we've got the farm. We want to scrutinise the overall impact. How about that?
Yeah.
Okay, so a recommendation. Now, I'm not sure if that would come to us or to corporate. I suspect. I think
it'll come to corporate, that one.
Okay.
Something I want to add to this: there is a climate emergency element to this because of the pollution and the noise impacts. The state of health.
It's a material.
The climate,
it's like Carriage Freeze. It's a material. From a climate point of view, but I think in terms of what we don't want from a climate point of view is everyone saying we hate solar farms because it trashed the roads for 2 years or something. All the dust you drifts onto the solar panels. So that's a recommendation to corporate and community then to scrutinise the transport plans for that area and the extent to which they support each other or are integrated. One other thing we could, one that we could ask them: are they going to bring in the bits in little trucks, or are they going to bring them in? So, could Boygues be asked in particular? That's the recommendation. What's their plan? Well, at the moment, there's an expectation they're going to be brought in on little pickups or something, and it might not be the case. So, let's sort out the expectations. And that's a very specific one. I haven't heard it either, but.
Well, the person who told me he's not here to defend himself, and it was some years ago. So
I appreciate that. Yeah.
I was going to say that's a very specific contractual thing, suggested at a point where we weren't at that stage.
It may not, but I think it's at least we can put it to bed. We'll find out if it's right. And boys might either laugh at us or they may say, "Yeah, we always do that." I don't know.
I'd turn around and say that the small vehicles mean more traffic.
Yeah.
And that's the trade-off.
It's not very efficient.
No.
Okay. So we'll get the question in as a recommendation then if we can, Neil. Okay. So the next item on the agenda. So anybody else got anything to say or recommend on Barkham Solar Farm? Are we all happy to go ahead with the recommendations as discussed? Poser, Charles, and then David seconder. All those in favour? Aye. All those against? None. Carried. Thank you. I love that bit. It's the best bit of meetings. Okay, so the work programme for the committee on page 21 of your report. So at the next meeting, we've got the comms, we've got solar farms, and we have the engagement and the considering the work programme. That doesn't seem like a very heavy meeting. Do we have anything else scheduled in there, Neil, that we've not, that isn't on this list?
Not at the moment, Chair.
Okay. Do we have anything that we've just had the action plan at council? Was there anything coming out of the action plan which we all read for council that you'd like to look at for the next meeting? Yeah.
Looking at the task and finish group, is there any mileage in getting an update? So page 25, we've got 23rd of May 2023, task and finish group recommendations. So those items are still ongoing. Is there any update that could be driven from there, or is that just something that we just leave for a while?
We can get an update, Chair.
I'm happy to have that. Anything else people want for next month? Nothing.
It's when I wasn't at the last meeting, but I noticed when I was reading the minutes that there's quite a lot of things that would be responded to. Just wonder if we follow up on some of those.
Okay.
They're all through the minutes, and when you were looking at the different priorities, there seems to be like 3 or 4 things that were going to be reported back on, and just about every one of those.
Okay, so I suggest that Neil and I go through the minutes and we see if we can chase up answers to those questions. Okay, is there anything else people want for the next meeting? No? Okay, well, we'll try and...
Can I suggest that the chair may wish to have a conversation with the executive member and the CAP team just to see if there's anything that they think might usefully come to the committee as well?
It's a very good idea, as always, Neil. Yes, we'll do that. Okay, and then the action tracker. So we've just done a little bit of that. Thanks, Chris. So page 25 and 26, the action tracker. No comments on that? Or thanks. No.
So can I suggest that all the ones that say ongoing will bring a little report to the next meeting just to say where we are and what action has been taken?
Well, all of them?
There aren't that many, Chair.
So you couldn't really do anything about the LPU until the LPU's been presented, so.
If you're happy to do that, yeah, there seemed a lot. Okay. Right then. I think that is it. I know you're all down to stay, but I think that's the meeting closed. Thank you very much, everyone. Good night.